The orbital station whisper of tides hung in the darkness of space like a silver seed waiting to grow. Inside its curved walls, thousands of beings from the species went about their daily routines. They worked. They studied. They ate meals at scheduled times. Everything happened according to plans that had been made long ago. They were tall and thin, with skin the color of polished silver. From their heads grew four delicate antennae that moved like grass in a gentle wind. These antennae helped them sense things that other species could not detect. They could feel changes in air pressure, tiny vibrations, and even the electrical signals that came from other living things. They were proud of their senses. They believed they saw the universe more clearly than most. Among the many on the station were children. The young ones lived in a special section designed just for them. Their days were filled with lessons about science, language, and the proper ways to behave. When lesson time ended, they had scheduled recreation periods. During these times, they would sit quietly and solve puzzles, or they would practice moving their bodies in controlled exercises. They believed that childhood should prepare young ones for useful adult lives. Play without purpose seemed wasteful to them. On one particular day, a young named sat near a large observation window, was smaller than the other children of the same age, with antennae that were slightly longer and more sensitive. While the other children worked on their assigned puzzles, stared down at the planet below. The station orbited a world where humans had built a small settlement. The Inhumans had made agreements to share this region of space, and so both species lived near each other, though they rarely mixed. Through the observation window could see a courtyard in the human settlement. The courtyard was simple. It had some grass, a few trees, and low walls made of pale stone. But what filled the courtyard made no sense to it all. Human children were running everywhere. They moved in ways that seemed random and without purpose. Some of them chased each other in circles. Others climbed on the walls and jumped off, only to climb up again. A human girl had found a stick on the ground. She held it in front of her and swung it through the air as if fighting an invisible enemy. She shouted words that could not hear, but her face was fierce and serious. Leaned closer to the window. A human boy had climbed onto one of the low walls. He stood there with his hands on his hips, looking down at the others. He said something, and the other children stopped what they were doing to look at him. Then they began trying to pull him off the wall while he pushed them away and laughed. It looked like a battle, but no one seemed angry. They were all making sounds that recognized as human laughter. Another human child, a girl with dark hair, walked in a strange pattern across the dirt. She placed her feet carefully, as if stepping on invisible stones. When she reached a certain spot, she jumped and landed with both feet together. Then she walked in the strange pattern again. Other children joined her, and soon they were all stepping carefully and jumping in the same way. Felt confusion growing inside. The child turned to look at the other young ones in the room. They sat in neat rows, working on their puzzles. Their antennae moved slowly, showing calm concentration. No one was running or jumping or hitting the air with sticks. A guardian stood near the door. Guardians were adults whose job was to watch over the children and make sure they followed the proper schedules. Walked over to this guardian, a tall female named, and pointed toward the observation window. "What are the human children doing?" asked. Walked to the window and looked down at the courtyard. She watched for a long moment. Her antennae twitched with uncertainty. "They appear to be engaged in physical movement," said slowly. "But why is that girl hitting the air with a stick?" Watched the girl with the stick. The child was now pretending to block attacks that were not there. She ducked under something invisible and then swung her stick in response. "Perhaps the stick is a tool for physical training," suggested, but her voice was not confident. "And the boy on the wall, why are they trying to push him down?" Had no answer for this. She simply watched as the human children continued their strange activities. After several minutes, she told to return to the assigned puzzles. The recreation period would begin soon and would have a chance to exercise then. But did not return to the puzzles. Instead, The young sat near the window and kept watching. As the days passed, became obsessed with the human children. Every chance got, the young would find a window that looked down at the settlement and observe what the humans did. Began to notice patterns. The human children played something called chase, where one child ran after the others, trying to touch them. When touched, a child would become the chaser. They also played a hiding game where one child closed their eyes and counted while the others ran to find secret places. Then the counting child would search until everyone was found. But the most confusing thing was how humans could change what objects were. The girl with the stick truly believed she held a sword. When finally got access to audio recordings from the courtyard, the young heard her call it a sword, heard her speak of enemies and castles and dragons. Dragons did not exist, and there were no enemies in the courtyard. Yet the girl acted as if these things were completely real. The boy who stood on the wall called himself a king. He said the wall was his mountain fortress. The other children were invaders trying to capture his kingdom, but it was just a low wall made of pale stone, barely taller than the boy himself. The children who stepped carefully on the ground said the dirt was lava, hot, melted rock that would destroy them if they touched it. But it was only dirt. Could see that it was dirt. The sensors on the station confirmed it was ordinary ground with no unusual temperature. Began to wonder if humans had something wrong with their minds. Perhaps they could not see reality correctly. Perhaps their eyes showed them things that were not there. Asked the station's information system to explain human games, but the answers were not helpful. The system said that human children engaged in imaginative play to develop cognitive skills and social bonds. It did not explain how they made themselves believe false things. One night lay in a sleeping pod and could not rest. The young's antennae moved restlessly, sensing the electrical systems of the station humming through the walls. Thought about the human children and their impossible games. They saw swords where there were sticks. They saw kingdoms where there were walls. They saw deadly lava where there was only dirt. And they were happy. That was the part could not understand. When children completed their puzzles and exercises, they felt satisfied. They felt accomplished. But the human children showed something different. Their faces lit up with a brightness that had never seen in children. They laughed until they fell down. They shouted with joy. They jumped and ran and played until adults made them stop. Wondered if humans had a secret. Maybe they could see layers of the universe that they could not detect. Maybe their simple eyes could perceive worlds that existed on top of the normal world. They were so proud of their antennae, their ability to sense what others could not. But what if humans had an ability even more powerful? What if humans could create new worlds just by deciding they existed? The thought was strange and frightening and exciting all at once. Lay in the sleeping pod and made a decision. Somehow, the young would learn what the humans knew. Somehow, would discover the secret that let them transform ordinary sticks into swords and plain dirt into deadly lava. Whatever magic the humans possessed, was determined to find it. The days that followed were difficult for. The young tried to focus on lessons and puzzles, but thoughts of the human children filled every quiet moment. The question burned inside like a small flame that would not go out. How did they do it? How did humans make themselves believe impossible things? Began talking to other children about the observations. At first, the others did not understand why found the humans so interesting. A quiet child with unusually dark silver skin said that humans were simply less developed than their games were just primitive behavior that they would grow out of when they became adults. Who was tall for a child and very good at puzzles, agreed with. Humans were known to be emotional and irrational, said. Their games were proof of this. But listened differently. Was closest friend on the station, a child whose antennae were damaged at birth and never grew quite right. Because of this, senses were duller than other children. The guardians often gave extra help and worried that would fall behind, but had always thought that saw things that other missed. "Show me what you have seen," said one day during their rest period. took to the observation window. Together, they watched the human children below. On this day, the humans were playing a new game. They had drawn lines in the dirt with their feet, creating a pattern of squares. Now they were throwing a small stone into the squares and then hopping through them on one foot. If the hopping child stepped on a line, the others would shout, and that child would have to stop and let someone else try. "Why do they care about the lines?" asked. "The lines do not do anything." "They made the lines matter," said. "They decided that the lines were important, and then they were." Antennae moved slowly, trying to understand. "But how can deciding make something true?" "I do not know. That is what I want to find out." For many more days and watched the humans together. They saw games of chase and hiding. They saw battles with stick swords. They saw the humans pretend to be animals, adults, and creatures that did not exist, and slowly began to feel the same curiosity that drove. "I want to try," said one afternoon. Felt excitement and fear at the same time. "Try what?" "I want to try playing the way the humans do. I want to see if we can do it too." The idea seemed dangerous. Children were not supposed to play without purpose. Their recreation time was scheduled and supervised. If the guardians caught them doing something strange, there would be questions and consequences. But could not ignore the desire to know. We would need to do it in secret. They made a plan. There was a cargo bay in a lower section of the station that was rarely used. Large containers were stored there, waiting to be shipped to other places. The guardians did not go there often. If and could find a way to reach the cargo bay during a rest period, they could try the human games without being seen. Getting there was not easy. They had to walk through corridors they were not supposed to enter. They had to hide from workers and pretend to be lost when an adult asked what they were doing. But finally, after many failed attempts, and stood inside the cargo bay with two other children who had agreed to join them. Had come because was always curious, even when pretending not to be. Had come because did not want to be left out of anything. The four young stood among the tall containers and looked at each other with nervous antennae. "What do we do?" asked. Had thought about this question for a long time. Of all the human games, one seemed simple enough to try. The humans play something called the floor is lava. The floor becomes dangerous, and you must jump on other things to stay safe. The other three looked down at the floor. It was smooth metal, the same as all the floors on the station. "The floor is not lava," said. "Lava is molten rock with a temperature that would destroy us in seconds. This is clearly a metal surface at standard room temperature." "I know," said, "but we must pretend it is lava." "How do we pretend?" asked. This was the question did not know how to answer. How did humans do it? They just seemed to decide that something was true and then it was true for them. Could children do the same thing? "Maybe if we tell ourselves a story," suggested. The humans always seem to have stories in their games. They say things like "we are explorers" or "you are the enemy." Maybe the story makes it feel real. The four children stood silently, tried to think of a story that might work. Then the young began to speak. "We are on a volcanic planet," said. "Our ship crashed here and we must reach safety. The ground is covered with rivers of melted rock. If we touch the ground, we will be destroyed. The only way to survive is to jump from rock to rock without falling." Pointed at the containers around them. "Those are the rocks. We must reach that far wall to be safe." The other children looked at the containers. They looked at the floor. Santeni twitched with disbelief. "This is not logical," said. "We know the floor is safe. We know those are containers, not rocks." "The humans know too," argued. "That girl knows her stick is not really a sword, but she fights with it anyway. She makes it a sword by deciding it is one." Silence filled the cargo bay. The four children did not move, felt disappointment growing. Perhaps children simply could not do what humans did. Perhaps there was something in human minds that they did not possess. Then jumped. Without warning, leaped from the floor to the nearest container. The jump was clumsy and almost fell, but managed to grab the edge and pull up. The others stared in shock. "The floor is lava," said quietly. "I felt it." "What did you feel?" asked. His antennae moved in a pattern that showed confusion and wonder mixed together. "When I jumped, my heart beat faster. I felt afraid, even though I knew I was safe. I felt like I had escaped something dangerous." Felt a spark of hope. Maybe the secret was not in believing false things were true. Maybe the secret was in feeling as if they were true, even while knowing they were not. Jumped to another container. The metal was hard and cold under his hands, completely normal. But as the young hung there above the floor, something strange happened. For just a moment, felt that the floor below was truly dangerous. The feeling came and went quickly, like a flash of light, but it was real. "I felt it too," said, and still stood on the floor, watching their friends with uncertain expressions. But when called to them, when said, "Hurry, the lava is rising," something changed in his eyes. Jumped to a container on the other side of the room. Then, not wanting to be the only one left behind, jumped as well. The game began to work. The four children moved through the cargo bay, leaping from container to container, calling warnings to each other about the imaginary lava below. When nearly slipped and fell, the others gasped with genuine fear. When found a clever path across a difficult gap, they all felt real pride. By the time they reached the far wall, all four children were breathing hard. Their antennae moved wildly with emotions they could not name. They looked at each other with wide eyes, trying to understand what had just happened. "We did it," whispered. "We survived." They all knew it was just a game. They knew the floor had always been safe. But somehow, that knowledge did not take away from what they had felt. The fear had been real. The excitement had been real. The joy of reaching safety had been real. Finally understood. Humans did not see false things. They did not have broken minds or special eyes that showed them different worlds. Instead, they had learned to build experiences from imagination. They could create feelings without creating real danger. They could make their hearts race and their minds focus without any technology at all. It was not magic. It was something even more amazing. It was a power that came from inside their minds, and it seemed that children could learn it too. The four young ones returned to their section of the station with a secret burning inside them. They had discovered something wonderful, and they knew they would return to the cargo bay again. The floor was just a floor, but when they decided it was lava, it became an adventure. The secret did not stay secret for long, and the other three children returned to the cargo bay many times. Each visit, they played the floor is lava game, and each time it became easier to feel the story as if it were real. Their jumps grew more confident. Their warnings to each other grew more urgent and dramatic. The cargo bay transformed from a storage space into a volcanic world full of danger and excitement. But four children keeping a secret is difficult. Mentioned the games to a cousin. Could not stop smiling during lesson times and eventually admitted why. Within one cycle of the station's schedule, more than 20 children knew about the games in the cargo bay. At first, felt afraid. If the Guardians discovered what they were doing, there would be serious consequences. The valued order and purpose above all things. Games without clear educational value were considered wasteful at best and harmful at worst. But the other children were too excited to stop. They wanted to try. They wanted to feel what and the others had described. And so the group grew, meeting in the cargo bay during rest periods, playing games that humans had invented on their distant home world. They did not stop at the floor is lava. The children began creating their own games, borrowing ideas from what had observed. One game used shadows. The children decided that stepping into a shadow meant you had entered another dimension. You could not be touched by other players while in a shadow, but you also could not move until you stepped back into the light. The game created complex strategies, as children jumped between pools of shadow and bands of light, trying to reach a destination before others could catch them. Another game used words. One child would be chosen as the frozen speaker. Whatever word this child whispered, any player who heard it would become frozen and unable to move until someone else touched them to break the spell. The frozen speaker would creep through the cargo bay, whispering dangerous words, while other players tried to avoid hearing while still moving toward their goal. The most elaborate game was about an invisible creature. Only one child could see this creature and had to describe where it was and what it was doing. The others had to trust this description and run or hide accordingly. The child who could see the creature changed each round, and each child imagined the creature differently. Sometimes it was tall with many legs. Sometimes it was small and fast. The uncertainty made the game terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Watch these games develop with amazement. The children were not just copying humans anymore. They were creating. Their antennae, so sensitive to tiny changes in the world, became part of the games. They could sense each other's movements, feel the electrical fear of nearby players, detect the subtle vibrations of running feet. In some ways, their games became even more complex than human games. And something else was happening. The children were laughing. Did not normally laugh the way humans did. They had quiet expressions of satisfaction or small sounds of approval, but the children in the cargo bay made loud sounds of joy. They fell down and could not get up because they were laughing so hard. They held their thin sides and made noises that no adult would recognize. Parents began to notice changes in their children. Young ones who had always been quiet now whispered to each other with bright eyes. Children who had struggled with their lessons seemed more focused and eager. Some parents were pleased by these changes without understanding the cause. Others grew worried and asked questions. It was only a matter of time before the guardians discovered the truth. Was playing the shadow game when the cargo bay doors opened and 3 guardians walked in. The children froze in place, not because of any game rule, but because of genuine fear. The guardians looked around at the scene with confusion on their faces. They saw children standing on containers. They saw children pressed against walls and shadows. They saw children in the middle of movements that made no sense. "What is happening here?" asked the guardian who had once failed to explain the human girl with the stick. No one answered. The children looked at each other, waiting for someone else to speak first, finally stepped forward. "We were playing," said. "Playing what?" Did not know how to explain. How could words describe what they had discovered? "We were playing games like the humans play." The guardians exchanged looks of concern, gestured for all the children to come down from the containers and stand together. Her antennae moved with worry and something that might have been fear. "You will all return to your sections immediately," said. "There will be a council meeting about this." The children walked out of the cargo bay in silence, felt sick with dread. Everything they had built, everything they had discovered, was about to be taken away. The council meeting happened 2 days later. The children were not allowed to attend, but rumors spread quickly through the station. The elders were debating whether human games were dangerous to children. Some argued that the games were a form of contamination, that human culture was infecting minds. Others said the games were simply unusual and should be studied before any decisions were made. Waited in a small room they had been told that the council wanted to question them. When the door finally opened, they expected to see another guardian. Instead, an elder walked in. The elder was named, and even the children knew this name. Was one of the oldest on the station, someone who had spent decades studying other species. Skin was darker than most, and 2 of the elder's antennae were bent from an ancient injury. Moved slowly but with purpose, taking a seat across from the 4 children. "Tell me about the games," said simply. Looked at the others, then back at. Something in the elder's eyes was different from what it expected. There was no anger there. Instead, there seemed to be genuine curiosity. So explained. The young told about watching the human children, about the confusion of seeing them play with sticks and dirt and invisible things. Described the first attempt at the floor as lava game and how strange it felt when the feelings became real despite knowing they were imaginary. Added details about the shadow game. Talked about the invisible creature. Listened without interrupting. When the children finished speaking, the elder sat quietly for a long time, then asked a question that surprised all of them. Did it bring you joy? The children looked at each other. Joy was not a word that used often, but there was no other word that fit what they had felt. Yes, said, it brought us joy. Nodded slowly. I have studied humans for many years. They are a puzzling species. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them constantly. Their planet had predators, diseases, disasters, and competition from every direction. By all logic, they should have become hard and cold to survive. They should have become like efficient, controlled, focused only on what is necessary. The elder paused, antennae moving thoughtfully. But they did not. Instead, they developed something remarkable. They learned to take the hardest parts of life and transform them. They take fear and make it into excitement. They take boredom and make it into adventure. They take conflict and make it into story. This transformation happens constantly from childhood until death. It is how they survive. The games, said softly, the games are practice for this. The games are the beginning, agreed. Human children spend years learning to transform reality in their minds. They practice making the ordinary feel extraordinary. By the time they are adults, this skill is so natural that they do not even notice they are doing it. It helps them endure suffering. It helps them find meaning in meaningless situations. It helps them bond with each other in ways that no treaty or agreement can match. Stood and walked to the window. Outside, stars filled the darkness, each one impossibly far away. I have argued to the council that we should not stop your games. I have told them that you may have discovered something valuable. The humans have given us many things over the years: technology, medicine, scientific knowledge, but perhaps their greatest gift is one that cannot be measured or traded. Perhaps their greatest gift is the ability to make any moment into an adventure, simply by deciding that it is one. The elder turned back to face the children. The council has agreed to allow your games to continue, but they have also agreed to something else. They want you to teach the adults. The children stared at with disbelief. Teach the adults. The idea seemed impossible. Many of my colleagues on this station have forgotten how to feel joy, said. They work and plan and worry, but they have lost something along the way. Perhaps they never had it. Perhaps they gave up this ability long ago in exchange for efficiency and control. But I believe we can learn it again. I believe you can show us. 3 days later, stood on a rooftop garden at the top of the station. The garden was used for growing plants that cleaned the air and provided food. It had small trees and soft grass and paths made of smooth stones. Around stood a group of 12 diplomats, including. They looked nervous and confused, their antennae moving with uncertainty. The game is simple, said, feeling strange to be instructing adults. One person is the chaser. Everyone else runs away. If the chaser touches you, you become the new chaser. The diplomats looked at each other. One of them, a tall female named, spoke up. What is the purpose? What do we gain from running and touching? Thought about this question. It was the same question had once asked about the humans. Now the young understood the answer. You will feel alive, said. You will feel your hearts beat faster. You will feel fear that is not real and joy that is completely real. You will feel connected to the others who play with you. That is the purpose. The diplomats did not look convinced, but stepped forward and touched on the shoulder. You are the chaser, said. Then the elder began to run. For a moment, nothing happened. The diplomats stood frozen, watching their respected colleague jog across the garden like a child, then made a decision. She started to chase. One by one, the others began to run. Their movements were awkward at first, Bodies were not designed for quick direction changes or playful dodging, but they tried. They ran between the trees and around the paths and across the soft grass. When someone was touched and became the new chaser, there were gasps and quick changes of direction. Watched from the side with end, they saw the moment when everything changed. It happened when, running from a younger diplomat, ducked behind a tree and made a sound that none of them had ever heard an adult make before. Laughed. The sound was strange and rough, as if it came from somewhere deep and unused, but it was real laughter, and when the other diplomats heard it, something broke open inside them. They started laughing too. They ran and chased and fell down on the grass, and they laughed until their sides hurt. Human workers from the settlement below had come up to the station for a meeting. Some of them stood at the edge of the garden, watching the play, saw them smiling and nodding to each other. They understood immediately what was happening. They had seen this before, on playgrounds and in backyards and in parks across hundreds of human worlds. They had seen the moment when play stops being something you do and becomes something you are. One of the humans walked over too. She was a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, one of the senior members of the human settlement. "You taught them," she said. "It was not a question." Nodded. "They taught us first. The human children, I mean. I watched them through the window." The woman smiled. "We've given your people a lot of things over the years, ships, medicine, all kinds of technology, but I think this might be the best thing we ever shared." Watched the diplomats playing chase in the garden. Their silver skin caught the artificial sunlight. Their antennae waved with emotions that had no names in the language. They were adults who had spent their entire lives being serious and efficient and controlled. And now they were running and laughing like children. "Why do humans play?" asked the woman. "Why is it so important to you?" The woman thought about this for a moment. "Because life is hard," she said finally. "Because the universe is huge and cold and does not care about us at all. Playing is how we make our own warmth. It is how we decide that this moment matters, that this place is special, that these people are important. The universe will not give us adventure or magic or meaning. So we created ourselves from nothing, using only our minds and our hearts. It is the one thing no one can ever take away from us." Understood. The young looked at, who was watching the diplomats with tears forming in her eyes. Tears were something did not usually show, but was different, had always been different, and now saw that this difference was not a weakness. It was an openness to feeling things that others kept locked away. "Should we join them?" asked. Smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was real. "Yes," said, "let us play." The four children ran into the garden and joined the game. For a few hours, there was no difference between young and old, between and human. There were only beings running through a garden in space, chasing each other and laughing, turning an ordinary afternoon into an adventure that none of them would ever forget. The floor was just a floor, the garden was just a garden, the stick was just a stick. But when you decided they were more, they became more. And that was the greatest gift the humans ever gave to the stars.